Alright, welcome back, Teardrop Builders. Today's going to be a big day. Today we're going to start on the rear hatch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what we're going to build, then I'm going to show you how we're going to build it, and then we're going to get started and we're going to build this thing. And hopefully here in a couple days we'll have the hatch framing all complete and ready for the skin. But before we get started, I think I'd like to start out with a very important message that is pretty much relevant for the days in which we live in.
Don't forget to wash your hands and your face and your butt. But don't wash your butt first. You'll get crap all over your face.
I cracked myself up. Alright, so I got a preliminary set of drawings here. So this is what our hatch is going to look like. This is kind of the exploded view. We have some outside rails on each side, and then of course we got about 6 cross members, and we've got about 4 inside rails that are going to be notched to accept the cross members. So we'll get those started, and that's what it's going to look like anyway. And I think it's going to be pretty tight. It won't be able to go out of square. So let's take a look at how we're going to start this project. Alright, so I'm starting out with a piece of the hurricane hinge that I'll be using, and this is an offset hinge, and I wanted the offset so when it's installed I have an area here that I can install my gasketing. So with our hurricane hinge in place, we are about 1/4 inch from the back edge here. So our cross member, our first cross member, is going to be 1/4 inch gap here. And then for this distance here, this is approximately 3/8 to about 7/16, somewhere right in there. And when we make our spar, we're going to have to compensate for the height of this curve here. So I'll show you how we're going to do that. And then there's another piece that I need to show you. Now this is a T-rail that's going to go onto the hatch itself. And when it closes, it's going to come down over top of our cabin here. And we'll have a piece of trim here with our gasketing material on it. And so we need to have this kind of overhang because, now this isn't the rail I'm going to use, but it sticks out about 1/8 of an inch here over the edge. So we also need that to stick out about 1/8 of an inch over the edge, which leaves a gap in here of about 3/8 of an inch. So our outside rails here will be 3/8 inch inside this way, so we'll have a gap here on both sides. It'll also be back 1/4 of an inch, and the height, I'll show you here in a minute what we're going to do for that. Alright, so with those little features out of the way, these are the rails that we're going to build. And so we have 2 outside rails and we have 4 inside rails with the notches that we're going to create. And let me show you how I plan on making these. So I have a 1/4 inch piece of plywood that is long enough and wide enough that when I set this up here to be able to trace my lines and everything, I'll have enough material after it's cut that I'll have a template. My 1/4 inch template is what I'm going to use when I go to cut my 3/8 or 3/4, because I'm going to use 3/4 inch lumber to make all my railings. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing we're going to do is I'm going to set this up here where I think it needs to be. I'm going to draw a couple lines. We'll get this rough cut, then we'll set it in place, and then I'll show you how we're going to get started and make our template so we can start making all the rails and we can get this thing together. Okay, so I just rough cut this piece of wood, so I did have some resemblance of a curve here, and I mean, it's still a big chunk of wood. So I got it clamped in place. Now what we need to do is scribe the actual height for our rails. So for that, remember, when our hurricane hinge is on here, we do have a gap right here. And like I said, it's about 7/16 of an inch. And the skin that's going to be over top of our rails is 1/8 of an inch. And then we have almost 1/16 of an inch for the Filon. So we need to subtract 3/16 from 7/16. And that gives us 1/4 inch. But I'm going to take it down to 3/16 because I don't want the hinge to be so tight on the top here when it's closed. We want to have just a little bit of a gap in here. Give it some room to move a little bit. So we're going to set our dividers 3/16 of an inch. We're going to come along here and we're going to scribe our line. Once we get that line set, either I trim it or I take it over on the sander and we'll true that up real nice and neat. We'll put it back in place and then we can mark for our edges here where they need to be. So let's get a line on that thing. Okay, let's do it. So I am going to start right here. And I'm not worried about the clamps. We'll come back and move those over and we'll finish our line. So just real quick, I have a line all the way scribed down and also made some tick marks here on our cabin and also on the side piece here. So when I put it back in place, I can line it up pretty easy and not miss my mark. So we want to make sure to get that back in the same spot it was. So now we will cut that and get that back in place, and then we'll mark for our ends here and get that to shape. Then we can set dividers on our template and get our right thickness there that we can cut our rails. Alright, so we've got a pretty good edge now, and it's sticking up about 3/16 above our wall here, all the way down. So now what we need to do is get it to length. So let me show you how we're going to do that and refresh your memory just a bit. Alright, if you remember a couple of videos back, I was showing you a little tip on how to make the spacers in between the spars. And if you remember, if you made a block and kept it, this is going to be what we use to figure out the length of our rails here. So we're going to take that notch, set it right over our template. We're going to push it up against the back face there and make sure it's nice and tight there. And then we're just going to draw a line, and that gives the edge for the length there. And now we also have to do it on the bottom. And let me get that done, and then I'll talk about how we need to offset these things and get it cut just right. Alright, so real quick, we have our line here for the ends. This is the bottom, and we offset 1.5 inches. So we'll have an 1.5 inch rail, 1.5 inch. I guess that sounds right. 1.5 inch. Alright, so remember up here at the top, because of our hurricane hinge, it has this 1/4 inch from here to here. It's 1/4 inch, so we're going to have to subtract 1/4 inch off the edge here. And if you remember, when we set our lid down, we have about 3/8 of an inch gap here. And we want to have the same down here at the bottom. So when the lid closes, we've got the same clearance. And when we put our little piece of trim on here, it'll stick up just a little bit here. And to give clearance, we are going to take off 1/2 inch off the bottom. So when the lid closes and we have that little trim piece on there, we should have still that 3/8 of an inch clearance which when this piece here, when this piece is sitting on our lid, it'll still cover our trim piece with our gasketing. It'll all make sense as we get going. So this is the slow part, making the template, but we got to make sure that the template is right, because everything else is going to follow. And if it's off just, you know, ½ inch here or ¼ inch there, it's going to make a big difference overall. So we want to make sure and get that template just right. So I'm going to take the ¼ inch off here at the top, take a ½ inch here off the bottom. We'll get that arc cut, and then we can start making our railing, at least the first part of it. Alright, so now we have our template all trimmed up and put into place on the inside here, just to see how well it fits. We got plenty of clearance around all of our stuff, and set back ¼ inch, so let's take a look at that. So that's probably about how that hatch will set. We can always raise that up just a little bit, and that'll give us enough clearance here that we can have a nice gasket under here, so when the lid closes it seals all the way down nice and tight. So put our template on there, offset at 3/16 of an inch. You can't just set your piece of wood here and scribe against this line and then raise it up, because it would be too close down here, and set up 3/16 of an inch here, so you wouldn't have any clearance, and when it opened you're going to have a gap in here. So it's important to do it just the way I showed you. Get a nice offset and then make your template. So this is what we're going to use to lay on our lumber, and we will take a router, set it on a router table, and route all these outside rails and inside rails out to make sure that they're all the same and fit nice. So let me show you what we're working on now and what we'll be working on next. So currently what we're working on is this rail here. We're working on the 2 outside rails, and once we set our lumber down, get our template in place, and make a couple of these, then we'll start on the inside rail here, these pieces here. And for that, when I go to cut my outside rails, I'll make a 3rd one, and I'll keep that as a template. Then I will take the piece that we just cut, and I'll go ahead and put our notches in here for our cross members, over and under. And then I'll make 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'll make 5. That way I have a template in case later on I decide to build another one of these. I won't have to go through all this measurement stuff. So that's what we're working on, these outside rails. So let's get our lumber out. We'll get those kind of rough cut, set up our router table, and install the template and get these cut out. Then we can work on this piece here. Are you following along? Good. Alright, so I have my template laying on my lumber, and I have 3 rails drawn in place, and we'll take a jigsaw and we'll overcut those by 1/8 of an inch all the way around. And then when we're ready, we'll take and fasten our template on top of our pieces, and then we'll run them through the router table, get those cleaned up, and then we'll start on our inside rails. So currently it's raining. Now we'll have to wait just a little bit till we get this outside, get it cut and routed. I decided to do it in my garage. Alright, so we do have 3 of the rails cut, and they're oversized, so when we lay our template on there, we just have a little bit that we need to trim off, get everything to shape, and one of these I will save as a template. So tomorrow, because it's late now, we will set up the router, get those trimmed, and then we can get the inside rails tackled. Alright, it's the next day, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take the template that we made, we're going to put it on our rails, and we'll temporarily fasten it, and that way it'll be a guide for our router table. So let's get these installed. Alright, so those two rails are finished, and I just have them clamped up against the side of the trailer right now. One, just to keep them out of the way so I don't step on them or break them or anything. And now we're going to work on this piece here. So I'm going to measure out, get my notches cut on this template. Then we will repeat the same process for our side rails here. I'll get everything cut out and then fasten the template to the wood and take it on the router and trim out everything, and then we'll see what it looks like when it's all finished. So let me get those done. Alright, so this is where you should be. You should have all your inside rails cut and your two outside rails, and of course your cross members. These are not cut to length just yet. We will be setting in place, and currently I have my 3/8 of an inch spacer on the side here, so when I clamp everything in place we should be in the proper location, plus a 1/4 inch from this back edge for the offset of the hurricane hinge. Alright, so next is to take our inside rails, and we need to back off 3/4 of an inch because our cross members are going to sit here, and make these a little bit shorter. So what we need to do is get those whacked off.
Did he just say whacked off? No!
So we need to get those cut off on both ends, and a 3/4 inch. And then we can start putting things together. We'll get our width or our length here on our cross members. We'll get things set in place and get some dimensions, and hey, we'll have a hatch before too long. Alright, so my first rail that I need to get cut, my cross member, is this top part here. According to my drawing, it should be 3/8 1/4. Took a measurement. I am about a 1/16 inch shy of 3/8 1/4, and I attribute it to things just moving, setting here in cold and warm temperatures. So about a 1/16 off here, and I'm about a 32nd here on the bottom. I'm pretty close. So we're going to get those two pieces cut to length. We'll get our side rails cut, or not cut, but we'll get those drilled, and then we can attach the top rail and the bottom here, cross members, and set it in place, and then we can check out our inside rails once we knock off the 3/4 inch on each end. We'll set everything in place, see what it looks like, and then we'll get things fastened together. Alright, just a real quick glimpse here before I get things rocking and rolling. So I cut my first cross member, and we are about 8 1/8 plus a 32nd, somewhere in there, and that fit just nice. It's not tight. And then our bottom section is about an 3/8 and a 3/16. And also, of course, you can see that little gap here at the bottom now. And then once we get our trim on here, that'll close that up just a little bit. That's going to set nice, so it's nice and even all the way across, and save you a little bit of trouble. But if you take a look at that, those are beveled at 12 degrees, and that's to compensate for the curve here. So it's got an inside curve and an outside curve. So these are 12 degrees from this bottom edge. And so cut my piece of wood at 12 degrees, and it fits like a glove. Alright, so the next thing to do now is to get our inside rails trimmed up and ready to get installed. So once I get those done, then we'll remove the side rails. We'll go ahead and fasten the top and the bottom cross members. We'll set everything back in place, and then we'll install the inside rails and make sure that everything fits nice and snug. So the inside rails are trimmed back 3/4 of an inch on each end, and now what we're going to do is we're going to take and install that inside rail onto the outside rail. So we have one laying here. We have a nice little mark that we're going to line that up with. We'll put some glue on there. We'll run some staples into this part. We'll do that to both sides outside rails, and then we can set things back in place and get our distance for our cross members here to make sure that we've got the right spacings. Alright, so let's get this glued up, and we'll staple that in place, and then we'll do the other one. Alright, so we have things kind of setting in place, locked together, not glued or screwed or anything yet, and so it's taking shape. So my next step now is to get these two boards, and if I numbered them, I'm going to start at 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we are going to glue in 2 and 3, and then we'll put in our middle rails here, and then we'll lock in number 1 and number 4. And then once all that's secured, then we'll take it off and we'll secure the end rails, here are the cross members, to the rails. Then we can set it in place and be good to go. Once all the glue's dried, everything's fastened, we'll get everything screwed up, and then, not screwed up, but we'll screw it together, and hey, we almost have the hatch done. So let me take all this apart and put some glue here on 2 and 3, get those back in place, and then get the rest of it glued in, and we'll let it set overnight. guys, I do hope you found that useful and less intimidating than some people fear. So, real quick, we just made the side rails, we made the inside rails, we cut a couple of sticks here for the cross members, and then we just glued things up. So, real simple job. Now, at this point, everything is drying. So I've got everything glued up, we've got it clamped in place. We'll let that cure, and once we take that off, then we'll be able to put the end rails on and get everything else screw fastened into place. Then we can start skinning on the inside, figure out where we're going to put our lights, and run a little bit of wiring. Then we can skin the outside, get some Filon on that, get the trim on it, and hurricane hinge will be almost set. So we're getting real close. So this was the last major build part of the series. So I hope I covered everything, and the drawings are pretty easy to look at and see what's going on. And once you see it take shape, then it makes sense. But relatively simple, and you can do it. Well, if you haven't already, give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell notification for the up and coming videos until we're totally done with this thing. And it's just right around the corner. And until then, hey, thanks for staying tuned, thanks for sticking it out and watching the videos, and as always, stay tuned.